Open a currency converter app on your phone right now. Type in Iranian Rial to US dollar. If you did this in early January 2026, you might have seen something that shouldn't be mathematically possible. You might have seen the value hit 0. It wasn't a bug, it was a prophecy. While the world was distracted by the US raid on Venezuela, the financial heart of the Middle East quietly stopped beating. In late 2025, the Iranian Rial didn't just depreciate, it evaporated. It crossed the psychological barrier of 1.5 million rials to a single US dollar. The currency has become so worthless that digital systems literally ran out of decimal places to track it. But this isn't just about numbers on a screen. This is about a nation of 88 million people who woke up to find their life savings turned into confetti. It is about a government that has finally run out of tricks, run out of friends, and most importantly, run out of cash. We are watching the first true economic toppling of a Middle Eastern power since the Arab Spring. The protests filling the streets of Tehran right now aren't chanting about religion. They are chanting about hunger. They are the army of the hungry, a force created by a regime that decided to fight an economic war. It couldn't win. Today, we are going to look past the political rhetoric and look at the balance sheet of the Ayatollahs. We will explain how the capture of a single ship, called the Bella 1, cut the regime's jugular, why China is abandoning its oldest ally, and why 2026 is the year the Islamic Republic finally goes bankrupt. Welcome to the collapse, the death of the Rial. To understand the magnitude of this collapse, we have to look at the speed of the fall. Currency crises usually happen in slow motion and then all at once. Iran is currently in the all-at-once phase. For decades, the Iranian Rial was a managed currency. The government used its oil wealth to prop up the value, creating an artificial stability that allowed the middle class to survive. But in late 2025, the dam broke. In January 2024, the Rial traded at roughly 500,000 to the dollar, already a disaster compared to historical standards. But by January 2026, it hit 1.5 million. That is a 300% devaluation in 24 months. To put that in perspective, if the US dollar lost value that fast, a cup of coffee that cost $5 in 2024 would cost $15 today. But in Iran, it's not coffee, it's chicken, it's medicine, it's rent. The collapse was triggered by a loss of confidence spiral. When a population realizes their government is insolvent, they rush to convert their local money into anything else: gold, crypto, dollars, even used cars. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everyone sells the Rial, so the Rial becomes worthless. In early January, we saw reports that some financial platforms briefly displayed the Rial's value as 0 sur euro, while this was technically a rounding error. In software not designed for such extreme numbers, it was symbolically perfect. It reflected the reality on the ground. The currency has ceased to function as a store of value. Shopkeepers in the Tehran Grand Bazaar, the historic heart of Iran's economy, have pulled down their shutters, not because they are on strike, but because they literally do not know what price to charge. If you sell a carpet today for 10 million rials, and tomorrow 10 million rials buys you half as much bread, you have lost money by selling your inventory. Commerce stops, the economy freezes. This is what economists call hyperinflationary stagnation. The inflation rate officially hit 42% in December 2025, but independent analysts put the real number for food inflation closer to 70%. Imagine going to the grocery store and seeing the price of milk change while you are standing in line. That is the reality in Tehran. Meat has become a luxury good. We are seeing reports of families cutting back on calorie intake, a level of food insecurity that Iran hasn't seen since World War II. The government has tried to stop the bleeding. They arrested currency traders. They shut down the internet. They even threatened to execute anyone hoarding dollars. But you cannot arrest math. The market knows the truth. The central bank of Iran is empty. They have burned through their foreign reserves, trying to defend a currency that nobody wants. And without foreign reserves, a country that imports 50% of its cooking oil and animal feed is destined for starvation. The zero glitch wasn't a computer error. It was the financial market's pricing in the end of the regime. The shadow fleet sunk, the Bella 1 incident. If the Rial collapse was the symptom, we need to find the disease. What changed? In late 2025. To trigger this specific crash, the answer lies thousands of miles away, floating in the middle of the ocean. For the last 5 years, Iran's economy has been on life support, fed by a single tube, the shadow fleet. Because of U.S. sanctions, Iran cannot sell oil legally, so they built a ghostly armada of aging tankers. These ships turn off their transponders, paint over their names, and fly flags from countries you've never heard of. They sail to Venezuela or China, transfer their oil in the middle of the ocean, ship-to-ship transfers, and return with bags of cash or gold. It was a clumsy criminal system, but it worked. It brought in roughly 1 million barrels a day of sales, just enough to keep the lights on in Tehran. As part of the U.S. operation to secure Venezuela, U.S. naval forces intercepted a massive supertanker named the Bella 1, later renamed the Marinera. This wasn't just any ship. Intelligence agencies identified the Bella 1 as a key node in the Iran-Venezuela axis. It was carrying sanctioned oil, but more importantly, it was carrying the payment. When the U.S. Navy seized that ship, they didn't just take the oil. They sent a signal to the entire global shipping insurance market. For years, the U.S. had turned a blind eye to some of this smuggling to keep oil prices low. But with the raid on Venezuela, the policy shifted from containment to eradication. The seizure of the Bella 1 caused a panic in the shadow fleet. Insurance premiums for these illegal voyages skyrocketed overnight. Captains refused to sail. Chinese refineries, fearing they would be next, stopped accepting Iranian cargo. This effectively severed the main artery of the Iranian economy. You have to understand, Iran doesn't have a diversified economy. It is a petrostate. It relies on oil for 60 to 70% of its hard currency earnings. When the shadow fleet stops, the dollars stop. When the dollars stop, the central bank cannot intervene to save the real. This is also why the capture of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela was such a catastrophic blow to Tehran. Venezuela and Iran had a survival pact. They traded gold for gasoline, technicians for drones. They helped each other evade sanctions. With Venezuela now under U.S. military control, Iran has lost its only partner in the Western Hemisphere. They are alone. The resistance economy that the supreme leader bragged about was built on these illicit networks. The U.S. just dismantled the network in 48 hours. The Bella 1 wasn't just a boat. It was the Titanic of the Iranian economy. And when it went down, it took the real with it, the China betrayal, With the West closed off and Venezuela captured, Iran had one last hope: China. For a decade, Beijing has been Tehran's economic lung. China bought 90% of Iran's oil exports. They signed a 25-year strategic partnership that promised $400 billion in investment. The Iranian regime bet everything on the idea that China would always protect them because China needs oil. But in 2026, the geopolitical math changed. President Donald Trump, freshly inaugurated and moving aggressively, played a card that terrified Beijing. He announced a blanket 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran. This was a poison pill for the US-China trade deal. China is facing its own economic slowdown. They are desperate to keep their exports flowing to the American market. When faced with the choice between saving the Iranian economy or saving their trade with America, the Chinese Communist Party did what they always do. They chose themselves. We are seeing reports that Chinese banks have quietly started freezing Iranian accounts. The teapot refineries. In Shandong province, the independent refineries that process most of Iran's illegal oil have slowed down purchases. They are scared. This is the China betrayal. The investments promised in that $400 billion deal never materialized. The oil China does buy is purchased at a massive discount, sometimes $10 or $11 below market price. China treats Iran not as a partner, but as a discount gas station that they can abandon whenever the police show up. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the impact of the 12-day war with Israel in mid-2025. That conflict was a disaster for Iran. It didn't result in a regime change then, but it destroyed key infrastructure. Israel targeted air defenses and, crucially, energy export terminals. The cost of rebuilding that damage has drained whatever reserves Iran had left. The regime spent billions on missiles and proxies. In 2024 and 2025, prioritizing the Ring of Fire around Israel over their own domestic economy. Now, the bill for that war is due. The military is demoralized. The proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, have been significantly degraded and are demanding money that Iran simply does not have. Iran is experiencing a geopolitical margin call. They leverage themselves to the hilt to fight wars in Syria, Yemen, Gaza, and Lebanon. Now the liquidity has dried up. The creditors, China, are walking away, and the assets, Venezuela, have been seized. There is no one left to bail them out. The bankruptcy of the state. Let's look at the internal books. If you strip away the wars and the sanctions, the Islamic Republic is fundamentally a bankrupt corporation. The budget deficit for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year is estimated to be around 1,800 trillion tomans. These numbers are so large, they become meaningless. So, let's look at the percentage. The deficit is nearly 40% of the total budget. A government has 3 ways to cover a deficit: tax, borrow, or print. Iran cannot tax because the economy is in a depression. Businesses are closing. They have no profit to tax. Iran cannot borrow because no one will lend to them. Their credit rating is non-existent, so they chose option 3, print. The Central Bank of Iran has been running the money printers at warp speed. This is the engine of the hyperinflation. We discussed in Section 1, they are printing money to pay the salaries of the Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, and the police, hoping that if they keep the enforcers paid, the regime will survive. But there is a bigger ticking time bomb: the pension funds. Iran has a rapidly aging population. millions of retirees rely on government pensions to survive. But the pension funds have been looted. Years of corruption and mismanagement have left them empty. The government is currently paying pensions directly from the daily budget. This is a Ponzi scheme. As inflation rises, they have to print more money to pay higher nominal pensions, which causes more inflation. It is a doom loop. There is also a darker theory circulating among economists: intentional devaluation. Some analysts believe the regime is intentionally crashing the real. Why? Because the government earns dollars from oil, what little they sell. By crashing the local currency, they get more reals for every dollar they sell. This allows them to balance their real-denominated budget on paper. It is a cynical, brutal strategy. It effectively transfers wealth from the savings of the citizens to the coffers of the state. They are liquidating the middle class to fund the state security apparatus. They are betting that they can starve the population, just enough to stay in power without causing a revolution. But that bet failed. In December 2025, the Army of the Hungry Revolution. On December 28, 2025, the calculation broke. It started in the Grand Bazaar of Tehran, the traditional barometer of Iranian politics. When the merchants closed their shops, the streets filled up. These protests are different from 2009 or 2019. In 2009, they asked, "Where is my vote?" In 2022, they chanted, "Woman, life, freedom." Today, the chants are different. They are chanting, "Death to the dictator" and "No Gaza, no Lebanon, my life for Iran." This is no longer a civil rights movement. It is a hunger riot. It is the army of the hungry. The demographics of the protesters have shifted. It isn't just students and intellectuals. It is the working class. It is the conservative base that the regime relied on. When a father cannot buy bread for his children, he loses his fear of the bullet. The regime has responded with violence, as they always do. But there are cracks in the armor. Reports suggest that even the security forces are demoralized. Their salaries are worthless too. How long will a soldier defend a regime that pays him in paper that cannot buy rice? The capture of Maduro in Venezuela sent a shockwave through the Iranian leadership. It proved that dictators can fall. It proved that the U.S. is willing to intervene physically. The psychological invincibility of the axis of resistance has been shattered. We are looking at 3 possible scenarios. For 2026, Scenario 1, the North Korea model. The regime closes the borders, completely shuts down the internet, and rules over a starving, isolated population with absolute brutality. Scenario 2, the Venezuela model. The economic collapse leads to a slow, grinding disintegration of society, with millions of refugees fleeing to Europe and Turkey, while the leadership loots what is left. Scenario 3, the collapse. The security forces fracture. The protests overwhelm the police. The regime, bankrupt and isolated, simply ceases to function. The search results and the data point to Scenario 3 being more likely than ever before. The money is the gravity that holds a regime together. When the money is gone, the gravity turns off. Iran is running on fumes. The Rial is zero. The oil is blocked. The friends are gone. The clock is ticking. The collapse of Iran is not just a Middle Eastern story. It is a global economic earthquake. If the regime falls, it changes the price of oil, it changes the security of Israel, and it changes the flow of refugees into Europe. We are witnessing the end of an era. The regime that defined political Islam for 45 years is being defeated. Not by an army, but by a balance sheet. They forgot the most basic rule of governance. You cannot eat ideology. But while the eyes of the world are fixed on Tehran and Caracas, there is a third crisis brewing that nobody is noticing. It's happening in Europe, in a country that is supposed to be a G7 powerhouse. Italy is watching these events with terror. Their economy is tied to energy imports and global stability. And right now, Italy's debt numbers are starting to look terrifyingly similar to the numbers we just saw in Iran. In the next video, we are going to break down the Italian job, why the Eurozone's third largest economy is the next domino to fall. You thought Greece was bad? Wait until you see Rome. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. You need to be ready for what's coming next. I'll see you there.